The group that we have here, the distinguished group that we have here, has a set of questions before them. They did not get these questions until this morning as well. Kind of half, maybe. Because there's two members of the executive committee sitting up here. So, again, same process here. You can take any one of the questions if you'd like, or question number 5, as it would be, is the other question. Say just about anything you want on the topic of education and workforce development. And I will lead into this as well. It would seem that in year 4 for this CyberGIS project, just like we were talking with the next panel, as David had mentioned it, if we hadn't been doing this outreach to this date, we need to start now. We have been trying to do this, but we want to put more effort, more energies into that. Maybe year 4 will be the year of broader outreach and engagement, just like we talked about the OGC thing, workforce and education as well, a need that the CyberGIS project definitely has. So do any of you want to go first as a comment to address the questions? Or Sean, did you want to do those slides? Or
I mean, I could. I have 6 or 7
I prefer
slides.
you don't, but that's okay.
Oh, well,
You know,
I don't have to. I'm happy to talk too. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
So question number 3, how might the project connect research and education activities better than we have thus far? And I'd like to start there and just go from there. It seems to me that a lot of what is happening in the project you would characterize as development, technological development. We're developing tools. The relationship between that and research is something we can discuss, but let me just use the word development, because that, I think, plays directly into education activities. And let me put it this way. It seems to me that anytime anyone in the project develops anything, they should be thinking at the same time about the education associated with that. In other words, what education is going to be needed to make it possible to take advantage of that development. So if you introduce some very sophisticated technology, I mean, let's go back a year or so to Hadoop. To what extent do users of your technology need to know about Hadoop in order to use your approach? Right? So it seems to me there's a very tight relationship between research/development and education. And to date, I suspect that linkage has not been developed, and I think really should. So let me go on to number 4, which is how important is a collection of CyberGIS learning modules, and how might we work towards development of such modules? I think that's, there's a useful term there, which is micro-insertion, which you may have come across before in the context of curriculum development. And what it means is the ability to, with a fairly small object, insert it into a curriculum. So Hadoop, for example. Where is the very small piece of learning material which can be inserted into a curriculum because it needs to discuss Hadoop? So I think, to my mind, the most important issue in question 4 is how might we work towards development of such modules? And I think as long as we focus on the first person plural, it's not going to happen. It has to be a community activity. In other words, how can the project stimulate others to create the necessary modules? A very good model there is the LISI, the Digital Library for Earth System Education, which flourished about 10 years ago. Some of you may have been involved at the time, and was very much a community-based, bottom-up approach to creating learning modules. So the community is invited to contribute material. There are some very loose standards. And that information is, the modules are synthesized into a collection. And that, I think, is the way this is going to happen. It's not going to happen top-down. And those are basically the points I wanted to make.
Comment, I guess, Mike's. So this is my first time attending the CyberGIS, and I'm glad I'm learning a lot about the activity. I didn't know anything about it before. And I keep thinking, I mean, when I heard the term partner, how can I help and become a partner? Or, as you said, how we can help with developing modules and so on. And one challenge I have, which is related to this education research, is that the type of activities I need to have my students to do in order to contribute to the CyberGIS is, at least from a computer science perspective, might not necessarily be immediately useful for them towards their PhD degree. And that's the real challenge I have, that how can I get them take one of our stuff and then wrap it and make it into a module here and help with the CyberGIS, because I think there's a lot of advantage and community service to do that, but it's just that what is the research benefit or educational benefit for them, so that I can incentivize them to do this. That's the
Were you asking as
You wanna
questions, so
respond,
the
or-
panel should
Right.
address that?
I'll actually respond, Cyrus, to your comment or / question. Let's take an example. In our research community, say, broadly speaking, geospatial geographers, geoscientists, we have a lot of papers publishing methods, right? And some papers including, say, these are the algorithms developed, or there are sometimes maybe, say, there are some associated tools. So in those cases, you contact with the authors, say, oh, could I try, right? Usually the response is, say, the code is not ready. So we see this gap in terms of knowledge production from the readiness of getting to literature to be able to reproduce science or knowledge. I think that's in the spirit of this CyberGIS project, is to understand we're not necessarily claiming to solve the entire spectrum of the problems, but our argument, and also we hope to gain knowledge in this project, is to say, what are the cost benefits? What are the complexity taking to the entire community to be able to transform this into a more productive knowledge community process? And as you saw this morning, our project is really taking hard work to understand what are the processes taking a contributed software component to make that component highly usable and sound in terms of the scientific knowledge embedded in that. And this is not only in computer science, but in many other domains, especially in some physical sciences. Some other physical sciences we could perhaps learn some experiences, for example, astronomy. There's this broad community. I think Jim Cray was one of the folks asked by Bill Gates. Bill Gates asked Jim, say, why do you choose to work on astronomy? I think Jim said, it's worthless.
The data.
Yeah, the data is all over the place, so you could have the greatest ideas to understand what it takes to produce solid science coming from a community approach. But in the geospatial world, it's more complicated. But
I agree with you. I think that there's definitely value in doing that. I keep thinking, how can I convince my students to do the extra work?
I think if you think that way, I think we might not move in the right direction. I think we have to establish mutually beneficial, let's say I'm using probably not a perfect analogy, ecosystem knowledge production. That means your students do not need to do the kinds of work, the extra miles, they don't gain benefits from their research point of view. But there are a tier of knowledge contributors. Their intention is to improve that knowledge produced by your students, but they get their credits from that improvement and become part of this big ecosystem. And that's where we are trying to understand how to establish that tier of ecosystem with scientific rigor, with highly applicable principles to potentially even beyond geospatial, because this project is funded by NSF as a demonstration project to show not only in our domain, but broad impact. What is that? So I think, to me, after learning from the experiences gained from the project members, this is very fascinating because we're entering into this world, just as you said, a lot of things are wasted. A lot of sciences are not done properly. because in the big data, big computation world, digital sciences, we have hard time to be able to replicate what's done in the past, and consequently, this is so wasteful.
Did others of the panel want to address that, Don? No?
Now I have several things rolling around in my head given the comments, but I was thinking in response to what you were sharing as well, I was wondering about two practical end members in terms of what the CyberGIS project might undertake. And my caveat is that I'm not involved on the PI team. I have not been, perhaps I'm missing what the CyberGIS project has already done. Steve Cope is the main representative from Esri. I'm the chief scientist of Esri, but I'm also a university professor. And I have just come as a cheerleader to the both CyberGIS meetings last year and this year. So forgive me if I express something that you already have underway. But one of the things that I was inspired by, which is related to Mike's recalling of Delisi, is that there was also this virtual geography project that Ken Foote of the University of Colorado put together. It was also very free-form. If you had a syllabus or a lab or a data set, just anything that you were using to promote or to teach GIS, because he had all kinds of things in virtual geography, but I was paying attention to the GIS component. You could contribute those to like a wiki or a website, and then all of a sudden there's this wonderful compilation of resources that were available that you could plug and play into your own courses. So I'm wondering whether something like that is underway for CyberGIS. I was also inspired because Xiao Wen was talking about his class that he's teaching right now, and he's taking CyberGIS, or I understood you to say that you were taking the CyberGIS toolkit, or maybe the CyberGIS gateway, and implementing, having your students work with that in your class now. That's what I understood you to say, and I thought that's great. And perhaps others are doing that as well. And if several researchers who are involved with us in CyberGIS are doing that, maybe now is the time to start compiling that so that people can plug and play as they need. That's one end member, I'm calling it. The other side is a more formal online course or seminar. We're all very familiar with MOOCs now, the massively open online courses, and I don't think CyberGIS is quite ready for something like that. But there is, I think, a nice exemplar that was put together by the UCGIS several years ago, and in several iterations. Some of us are graduates, so to speak, of the UCGIS virtual seminar series, where they're University of Georgia, Oregon State, Ohio State, UCSB, we all got together and we did a course together online using the latest technology. And we discussed, at that time, we were discussing, I believe, the UCGIS research priorities. But why not a course, a similar kind of course that focuses on the principles of CyberGIS, some of these topics that we've been talking about. So that's what I wanted to contribute.
Sean,
Well,
let me preface something first here. So Sean had some slides. Now, Sean's just coming off of maybe recently here the Body of Knowledge 2.0 National Science Foundation project. And UCGIS was a partner in that we wanted to, I'm past president of UCGIS, redo. UCGIS wanted to play an outreach kind of role to that, and unfortunately NSF cut the budget somewhat, so we weren't able to do anything there. And so particularly Sean and Andre is part of that Body of Knowledge project as well, having heard from Andre and the May Symposium at UCGIS with some great ideas. That's principally why they're here in this project, because CyberGIS project does have an interest in doing something with some tool-based online stuff. Not to say that not John Wilson's effort that is rolling forward right now isn't going to do a big splash and so on, and it probably will as well, but having multiple approaches to the nature of the body of knowledge, particularly if it's oriented to something related to CyberGIS, is something we're interested in hearing about. Now, Sean, if that's not related to your slides, or that's not related to what you want to say, you want to say something else to Don, that's
No,
fine.
Tim,
That-
thank you for telling me
Okay.
why I'm here, because it's always really helpful to know.
And I might add, if anybody has any questions about reimbursement, of course, then, and been notified about that, you send emails to me. Right, so.
Okay. All right, so I don't need to show slides, that's fine. But I think one thing that's interesting, and this is the third year I've been here, actually I missed year 2 because my plane never made it off the tarmac, but is the need to define what CyberGIS is. And that's been throughout the 3 years. I think that's, and I think that was discussed this morning. And so we've been working on what's really a cyber infrastructure to develop the next body of knowledge for geographic information science and technology. And that infrastructure is composed of a core, which is an ontology using semantic web technologies. And we have REST services that tie into various applications. And one of those applications is the Visual Wiki, which is used to add to the body of knowledge. And that feeds into the ontology, and we're versioning the ontology based on version stamps, sort of a tag for each concept that is developed and when it was developed. So for instance, all the concepts in the body of knowledge 1.0 will be tagged 1.0. And there'll be a 1.1 perhaps version. And I sort of call that, sort of in parentheses, because I think we want to develop it such that these versions are authoritative, but we also want sort of a beta environment out there of concepts that haven't been approved, okay? So we've looked at this, and in fact, Andre's talk tomorrow will look at how the different, the foundational articles behind CyberGIS, how they project onto the body of knowledge, and how the articles since then project, and compare those two. So I encourage you to go to Andre's talk tomorrow afternoon. Now, I guess what we're proposing, what seems to make sense, is why don't we take CyberGIS as the first pilot of the infrastructure that we've built for the body of knowledge, and try to build a body of knowledge for CyberGIS. And so that would be my proposal. And we're at the point now where we're very close to enabling that. And I think we can actually start it by using the Visual Wiki, which is operational. We're transferring that to a standalone server so that we could take in more traffic. And we're in the process of versioning the ontology, which was built for the body of knowledge 1, and connecting the Visual Wiki with the ontology so that those versions, as they come in, can be looked at. And there's a number of different approaches that we're using for the approval process. And I'll just suggest 4, and then I'll stop at that. The traditional top-down approach, where we have experts who say this is a concept that should be included or not. We could have scores for a new concept and its connections generated through bottom-up collaborative fashion in the wiki way. And we could also have scores for new concepts that could be determined through the nature of the contribution and the way in which contributions are added. And then the fourth one could be one in which concepts are given weights as to the contribution based on the data mining of the individual's publications and how relevant those publications are, and so forth. So these are different ways of creating an authoritative product. But keep in mind, we would want to have the concepts that people had suggested out there as well that could be accessed. So this is just a suggestion or a proposal that your team use our technology to create a body of knowledge. I think Serge was mentioning taxonomy for parallel algorithms for spatial analysis. Those are the kinds of things that haven't been laid out there, and I think would be very helpful for your effort.
It dawns on me that maybe the OGC activity that we were talking about might be a fifth way of vetting, and we have no idea how those four might map onto the OGC process, but nonetheless, that would be something interesting to investigate in a way that really what the synthesis part of a knowledge production process really is about. That, so that's in the spirit of the kinds of things that the
Right.
CyberGIS project is interested in. And certainly at all levels of the stack, again, all of the level, I'll just leave it there because there's rows, I'm sorry, there are columns as well in the stack, and I'm not sure Xiaowen could offhand mention what these different columns are in the stack, but we'll just leave
Well, I
it.
mean, here we're talking about what are the fundamental principles, concepts which are
Yeah.
important for the field,
Yeah.
and what are their relationships, what do the hierarchies look like? Is this a separate, in the lingo of the body of knowledge one, is this a separate knowledge area, or is it part of an existing knowledge area? Where does it belong within the broader ontology of GIS&T?
So in the architecture that Xiaowen had published, and I'm saying that no one else has published an architecture, so therefore, well, actually that's not true either, because Chao-Wei Wang has published Yan has published a architecture in spatial computing. Mike, you were part of that publication as well. But given those architectures, they're component architectures, really is what it is. So I think that's in a way what you're talking about, that there are components of knowledge out there, chunks of knowledge that need to be vetted in some way, and they have linkages to other things. And so that may be some way forward that we could take up here. Coming back to Cyrus's question before, I just wanted to say that if the PhD student would take up the idea that an educational component in any National Science Foundation proposal is a valued thing these days, then that's a way you can engage the PhD student, is say, well, this would be like you were writing a proposal to the National Science Foundation, and your educational component would do, or I would say the learning module component, because there must be some way to use the ideas that we have in a lot of different research, and as Mike was saying, get them into the educational process. Because every piece of research should be vetted out there somehow, some way in the educational process, and that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of trying to synergize that idea. Are there other questions? So we have about 10 minutes remaining here, and are there any of these other questions or any other issues that the panel wants to take up before I begin?
I did not get my opportunity to respond to the questions yet. I responded to Cyrus, so
Okay.
I'll take
Okay, take
another
this up.
opportunity of responding to the questions. I think this is related to the comment Don brought up, so I feel like it's useful to make a few comments. In the project so far, we've been taking an opportunistic approach to generating education training materials. So went to a number of workshops to give tutorials that are more targeted to specific research activities, as Mike mentioned. And I taught a small number of courses, included some modules inserted into existing courses. I think this is a year, at least from the project director point of view, this is a year of really upgrading this kind of opportunistic level of activities to a more community level activities for several reasons. One is, as you saw this morning, we do have a reasonably comprehensive software environment that after 3 years work, getting stable. Quality is not perfect, but we are confident enough to release not all the modules altogether, but some modules. Because if we don't have that, if we go out to teach other people what CyberGIS, I think that's a little bit of jumping too much ahead. So we've been waiting for some time in the project for research development activities to give us a reasonable, good quality, comprehensive environment for us to show what is the innovative aspects of CyberGIS in the broad context of CyberGIS ecosystem that we could convince students to benefit from. Second of all, I think we're badly missing content in this area. My own experiences as we are doing research, I just came up with a few things thought students might be fired up by some experiences we gained in the research part. So based on my own assessment, we don't have a whole lot of content out there that are well vetted for people to adopt. So if we take seriously in terms of a community approach, I think we badly need contributors and participants that are willing to vet each other's contributions. That's where I think our content will drive the mechanism of sharing and governance and co-evolving. And right now, we just need to pull a set of contents together that, at least from practical side, I see a way to jumpstart. I could tell you I had a private conversation with Dawn. Dawn actually announced it to everybody. So I need to.
Because I was inspired.
Thank you. So I was working with QMARS, sitting back in the room. This semester I'm teaching a regular middle-level undergraduate and graduate course that includes a number of majors in the class, from applied to computing. So I told them this year, this course will be a roller coaster. Don't assume this is a business as usual, because you gotta help me evaluate whether your learning is fun. And in this class, I'm pulling, as I'm learning, what might be the most appropriate education materials to give to students who are not well equipped to synthesize between computing and spatial. That's the given fact for at least so far the students I'm exposed on Illinois campus, which is a pretty technologically sophisticated campus. But the students will get to the GIS class because ultimately the frontiers of CyberGIS is going to be pushed by those who are able to master across the aisles in the computation data science side and also in the spatial GIS science side. That's a given challenge we need to deal with. And what are the stakeholders, communities, contributors, minds of aspiration we need to pull together the first set of content, which may not be comprehensive or complete. I think I'm eager to see that happen.
David?
So the comment I was going to make is sort of very aligned with what you've just said. Using CyberGIS in your own classes, everybody who's involved in the project who teaches a class should probably be trying to use some aspect of it, because that just changes the perspective of how you sort of do the development and drive the development. And I mean, I've found that the interface to hyperlogic terrain analysis software I've refined, because trying to put it in front of my students, you have to sort of simplify it and get it to a usable form. It's an incredibly useful driver. And then once you're doing it for your own students, other people have a chance to pick it up and do it for their own students.
So might I interject as
It's
well?
kind of like eat your own dog food, which is one of the slogans in software.
Two aspects of the content that Xiaowen you were referring to. I have been looking, let's say, for the last year about where in the CyberGIS project are the lab assignment materials, the chunks of lab assignment materials that I can take up and bring into my class. And then at the same time, where what I would call the lesson material that complements the assignment material, so that I have both the lesson and the assignment together. And those two things, be it simple or whatever, would be the lesson that is actually interjected into this, what's that, four? Yeah, the learning module. The learning module to me is the assignment plus the lesson. Those two things together I can serve up as a module, no matter what it might be. I don't care if it's in the sequence or so on. So those are the things that I'm interested in year 4 in exploring a lot more in detail, particularly with the comment that of the, Mike, you had mentioned, and Don, you followed up with the 10-year ago kind of virtual geography was one aspect of that. And from the point of view of maybe social media, so we can do something in social media maybe along these lines to get some ideas out there. Who has what available to do this kind of content population and make space available, and then body of knowledge stuff certainly must link in there at some point. Question, comment?
Oh, yeah. I have just a comment. So I think I didn't know quite much about your project in the past years. But given what I have heard so far, including the comment from Sean about CyberGIS, because recently I have heard many things: CyberGIS, WebGIS, Virtual GIS, Internet GIS, and blah blah blah. This is a great progress and concept. I wonder maybe in the future for you or someone else in your team, you can probably, speaking of the fourth question about a learning module, if you can develop a very concrete example to say how we can use this example to demonstrate CyberGIS, and how CyberGIS can be used differently compared with traditional GIS. And for example, you may think about an application for an audience with some generic scientific background, maybe a little bit of GIS, to see how we can do this with a regular GIS, CyberGIS, how we can solve this differently. So that actually gets back to Mike's 4 questions. What kind of discoveries can we do can we not do without CyberGIS? What kind of questions we can address? What predictions we can do it with CyberGIS? Because right now, so far to this moment, it seems there are many things coming together. So I guess for you guys as the top CyberGIS scientists, you know where you are. But for some of the general audience, they may just get lost. That's kind of my key message is a very concrete example to showcase what CyberGIS is and what you can do, and how CyberGIS may be developed in the next 10 years, 20 years, and so on.
So could I comment on that too? I think that's an excellent point, Lee, and I was wondering also about audiences for materials. Whenever we teach a class, develop a curriculum, is it for undergraduates? Is it for graduate students? Is it for geography majors? Is it for non-majors? We are talking here about the 4 different kinds of scientists that you mentioned from Mike's remarks, including the so-called 5 million and the average citizen. So that's an audience for these CyberGIS educational modules. I guess we should also be thinking about, are we developing specifically for the undergraduate audience, or specifically for the graduate audience at the master level, or for the doctoral students who are doing a seminar? So I guess those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about as well.
That is a lovely breakout group topic. Learning modules for the different levels of education, as it might be.
And you want to include informal education as well, mid-career.
Yeah. Yeah.
Professional training.
Outstanding.
So this is a background actually in the parallel processing community. I have been very involved with similar issues, and just want to recount what we have done that might be useful here. So this community is very large, very old, and of course that's actually a component of what is happening here as well. But we, in terms of trying to give some incentive to those who are actually producing content, we organized competitions. We gave actually some seed grants, and therefore actually we had some early adopters. Right now we have 100 early adopters all over the world who are trying to essentially use some of the body of knowledge that was proposed by community experts. So I think the body of knowledge effort, of course, is very useful, but it has to be adopted and it has to come from experts as well as the community has to really get it up, right? So that actually has happened and taken a lot of time. Also, actually, we had some people contribute to an edited book, and that's going on right now. And so that's another incentive where people actually are trying to publish. But that's something that I'm very excited about when something comes out. So there is a book that's coming out that's going to be edited, and public, in fact, instructors and others actually are contributing chapters in it. So there's a wide variety of things which could be done to create body of knowledge, standardize that, have it adopted, and also create content. And there are many who can create content. It's not just this room. Assuming that there are actually many others who are interested as well.
There were a couple of other things. Okay.
So I make a
Yeah.
comment. So I'm planning to share in the course I'm teaching this semester, labs, modules out of that course. I was inspired by Luke because he was giving a talk at Brown, and he was brave enough to use our most recently developed tool to showcase to his audience. And Luke, if I remember you correctly, you were writing some tutorial instructions.
We're writing a manual.
Yeah, manual that could potentially include our most recent research outcome, and yeah, it's already doing that. So I think it takes collectively all these activities, and if our spirit is to have this little bit organized, sense of community, and we'll figure out a nice mechanism to scale, right? The participation and also vetting the quality.
When you say share, does that imply, I hope it does, that you will, within the CyberGIS website, establish an infrastructure for uploading materials so that others can access them?
Yeah.
And that will scale so that as the number of materials gets larger, there will be search mechanisms?
I will not guarantee the scalability that clearly requires research, not only alone education. But in terms of the sharing, I was alluded to the course materials produced, right? The labs, because Tim was asking about it.
We will be working, haven't said, and we will be working on that together so that the more collaborative stuff. In fact, this idea that we just have, there seem to be 2 breakout groups now, maybe forming, because that was my big worry. What would the breakout groups actually do, given my knowledge production process that I'm interested in structuring to move forward here with the nature of the big picture CyberGIS? So Don was suggesting this, we don't call it across the curriculum because that might be a little bit different way to look at. So this is depth of the curriculum here that we're looking at, but of course we have to go broadly and depth, right? So that's the whole thing, get all of that in there. But in terms of what do you want to phrase, how do you want to phrase that in terms of the depth of the curricular material that needs to be put out there? So it's like, this is the demand side, and then we have some materials, others might have some materials, we pull together the ideas on these materials. Here's the supply side, we need to match up the demand and supply which we have now in terms of really moving this forward so that we could really get ramped up here and get started here.
Maybe I could just say one more thing, which is the kind of infrastructure you would need already exists in a number of contexts,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
could piggyback on that rather than reinvent.
Leverage. Yeah.
So Delisi is one. There's another one. Well, there are several of these peer-to-peer learning module sharing sites that would play exactly into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So we looked at Hub Zero already as a site that now has 700 operations and nanotechnology simulation. But the nature of the learning modules, and there are others out there as well, of course, in terms of the model that we could use.
There's a peer-to-peer site, which I remember because it embeds SEX, and so most schools can't actually access it.
Okay.